Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Entropy podcast. I'm your host, Francis Gorman. This is episode 11. If you're enjoying our content, I'd really appreciate if you could like and follow the show wherever it is you get your podcast from. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Katie Colgan, an application security professional, a champion for women in tech, and a role model for anyone balancing a demanding career with raising a family. From pausing her career to focus on her children to staying ahead of industry trends, Katie's journey is a masterclass in resilience, passion, and intentional living. Katie, it's absolutely fantastic to have you with us here today.
Thanks, Francis. I'm glad to be here.
Katie, you have an angle that I've been wanting to talk about for quite some time, which is protecting our children online, child safety, awareness for parents. What are the biggest threats that kids face today?
I think the biggest threats are going to be the lack of supervision when they get into tech. So a lot of young people, particularly 5, 6, 7-year-olds, have their own technology, and that leads to a lot of parents being comfortable with their kids being online on different types of applications, things like that. That they may not know themselves what's possible within those apps. If they're just sort of giving a brief look at it and going, yeah, okay, go ahead. That kids then go and do things that they don't necessarily know what to do with. A lot of it coming down to like adverts on seemingly benign games. Ads can be one of the biggest opportunities for kids to see things that they shouldn't be seeing, particularly at such a young age.
Off the back of that, Katie, what age do you think parents should start talking to their kids about online safety then? What do you think is a suitable bracket?
as, as soon as they're able to use tech. Personally, my view would be that as you as a parent use tech, talk to your child about how you're using your tech, so that you can demonstrate that you're using social media in a particular way, or you're seeing something that you don't like an advert, and you can explain this ad is trying to sell me something, or a phishing email, or a message that looks a bit funny. Actually showing kids how that works from day one means that that's going to be in their brain as they get older, that it's not a new experience for them when they're faced with it themselves.
I think that's solid advice. Do you find parents are receptive to discussing cybersecurity around their children, or are they dismissive? I find personally, because I work in the field, you know, I lecture and then realize that's not the right approach. I should be more receptive.
Yeah.
And I think as a cybersecurity professional, we have to be conscious that we probably see the ugly more than most
Mhm.
people, and it's not something that they're consciously thinking of. So is the messaging when you speak on these areas, do you find people are respect or are understanding that they want to listen, or are they dismissive of the content? How do you feel that lands?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person and what their view is on tech, and also just what their experiences have been with tech, because not everyone has seen the ugly in the online world. And so if you have never yourself seen something particularly malicious, or really heard much about the dangers of being online, you're going to be a bit more like, oh, it's fine. And I think that's part of the problem, being that a lot of people don't know what they might face, particularly if a parent uses tech in one way, their kid is unlikely to be using tech in the same way. So they're going to see different dangers. And so the actual knowledge of a parent knowing what apps are available and what those apps can do, like does an app have inbuilt chat features where you can talk to someone um, that you don't know, that you're not friends with? Is that something that exists on a different app that you've maybe never used? Is something that some parents will not be aware of, and that's a big like educational piece for parents, because I have had some parents who very much agree with the sort of aspects of we need more education, and other parents who are just sort of like, yes, we do some of the things like checking out like Common Sense Media before they will use an app with their let their kid have an app or watch a movie or those sorts of things. But be very sort of relaxed about other things. Um, but yeah, it's a really hard balance between being in the industry and knowing so much about what does happen online, versus someone who's just using technology. It's similar to like a dentist who sees all of the horrendous things that happen to someone's teeth, but 99% of people will never see that. So they'll have that experience of you must do this, this, and this to make sure that your teeth are as healthy as possible. I think that could be, the pinch of salt with a cybersecurity professional who sees everything, how much of that is actually directly impacting anyone in their day to day is an important thing to consider when talking to parents about online safety.
I think you touched on something there, which is the online chat features, and this is something I find particularly frightening with some of these applications that you assume you give your child something that is focused at children and it is a certain age group, and that only users of that age are interacting with them, and they're innocent and harmless.
Mhm,
But we know the tech companies are very lax in terms of verification. You can set up
mhm,
an account, a Facebook account, and then use that as an identity provider to set up a whole string of accounts off the back of it with no verification or validation. So
yep,
I could be a predator in that app masquerading as a 10-year-old boy or girl, and nobody is the
yep.
wiser unless you're really looking. And then apps that self delete messages, or hide messages subliminally within the application as well. It's a minefield really in some of these areas.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even as far as even if it's not necessarily direct messaging, even leaving comments can be a place to be communicated with, that may not be something you would immediately identify as a risk. Um, but the um, direct messaging within an app that's aimed at kids, one of my sort of concerns about people focusing into apps that are aimed at children is that piece on being able to verify who you are based on something else. There is no local, like, you can't use your driver's license to verify your ID online. That's something that is verified by the government to say, yes, this is valid. So when you have an app that is aimed at children, the likelihood is that that's a place where predators, people who want access to children, are going to focus their attention. And that makes it really difficult to for me as a parent to trust that with that app with my child, because there isn't that security in knowing that the people actually on that app are also children.
It's a really uncomfortable concept
Hmm.
when you start to talk about it like that. And
Definitely.
you know, you look at your kids and they're precious, and then
Hmm.
you somebody once said to me, you used to go out in the world and maybe get bullied, and now you can be bullied at home in your bedroom,
Hmm.
at
Yep.
night time, during the day, it follows you around. So in terms of screen time or allowing a child to have a device, do you think there's a healthy balance in terms of being present with reality versus spending all of their time looking into their phones?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, kids are not built to live on their screens, and I know the world is moving towards tech. There's no doubt about it. You need to know about technology to to exist in the world at this point. So much of government support and applications and things are all moving online, but there is a whole world out there of things that are outside a device. While saying that, speaking on a computer feels a bit funny, but um, a lot of things are migrating onto apps that are keeping you pinned to your phone that you could be doing not on a device. Like as a personal experience, I had been playing Candy Crush for years from like they introduced the app. And I've recently deleted that because it was taking up a lot of my time of doing that instead of anything else. But I've recently been playing Sudoku instead, on an app, but they've gamified it to the point that I then don't want to put it down. Whereas if I was using a book of Sudokus, I would do a couple and then probably get bored and go and do something else. But because they've gamified it by adding other elements to it, they're hooking me into staying on my device. And I'm a 32-year-old adult, and I find it difficult to put my phone down. I can only imagine how hard that is as a 4, 5, 6, 7, 18-year-old also trying to manage that pull into a device.
And I think that's something that doesn't actually get enough awareness. I had Louise McCormick on a couple of episodes back talking about ethical AI, and we ventured into this whole concept of the psychology behind the applications that are driving you.
Mhm,
You know, the constant notification. You know, you leave
mhm,
the phone down. There's a buzz. There's a draw, and it feeds on your emotions.
yep,
It pulls you back depending on the application. And social media companies are experts in this field
mhm,
for making sure that they get your time, because the app is free, but you're giving them your data, you're giving them your attention.
yep,
That's where the cost comes. The cost comes in terms of time, and time is
yep,
precious. We only have so
yep,
many hours in the day, so many days in the year, so many years in our lives, and yet we give them into these devices, and at a cost of our social surroundings. It's a really slippery slope. And Louise said something on that episode that has stuck with me ever since. She made a statement that once you give a child a device, you potentially lose the control over the type of person they're going to become.
mhm,
And she made an analogy that a media company, a social media company, or another technology provider may just put them in a test group, you know? So if you're going to
mhm,
have a good child, if you're going to have a bad child, if you're going to have a child that is defiant, that's no longer up to you. You're
mhm,
now being led by the technology that they're consuming. And that was a terrifying concept to hear out loud. And I stop sometimes and look around, and everyone is looking in their phone. If you go to a
mhm,
train station or an airport, we're all guilty of it. We're looking in a device, we're flicking. All you're
yep,
seeing is the light shine up in their face. People aren't interacting as they used to be, and our children are watching us, and
mhm,
they're just repeating that behavior when we give them a device. So we can't wag our fingers and say, now
yep,
child, why are you behaving like this? And you go, well, daddy, mommy, this is what you do every day, so why
yep.
can't I? So it's a reflection of self to an extent that we need to be conscious of. um Katie, I want to talk about devices for kids, things that we think actually help protect them or make them safe. There may be a darker side to those devices. Do you want to give me a view on some of these areas? I know it's something that you're passionate about speaking about.
Yeah, so there are so many devices out there that claim to be protecting kids. That the idea being that it's a device that's for keeping kids safe with kids in mind. And I genuinely believe that the people who start up using these, making these devices have that intention. I can't possibly imagine that they don't. However, when you put the name of a kid safe or a kid focused device where it records any kind of data, that becomes a target. It's something that says this company has lots of data about children, and we, as a third party to your family, you don't know what is happening in those companies. So there's quite a few different companies, like there's Pinwheel, the Gab phone, there's the Bark phone. There are three of the companies that I've noticed recently, that have kid safe phones or or watches, some variation of a things like an Apple Watch, like a tech watch that is more limited in what the functionality could be. But they're all aimed at allowing parents to have some kind of control monitoring of what their kid does on that device. So things like the watches would be about sort of tracking where your child is. You've got GPS, which, you can use WhatsApp for that as a tracking thing. Most apps now have some form of GPS, that ability. And so it's all about the technology. Things like the watches would be limiting, like that they can only message certain people or phone certain people. Um, and they all have varying degrees of what they do. Most of it being about knowing at least where the device is. In theory, your child is with that device, and also then being able to sort of manage what they do on that device from afar, because typically these devices come with a parental overview or some kind of connection for the parent with the device. And what I have seen a lot of this being is some of it's monitoring 100% of, you can see everything that's on your child's device, which I understand why parents may want to see that, because they'll miss things. Like you won't be able to look over your child's shoulder all day, every day to see what they're doing. And so if you can, take a quick nosy at who they've been texting, what they've been saying, that kind of thing, I can understand the desire for that. But when it comes from a place of losing the connection with your child, you're also losing a bit of the trust with your child, particularly if the only thing, whether you tell them that you are monitoring their device is one thing. Like, there will be some parents who may not actually say that there's certain technology on their kid's phone, which immediately, when their child finds out they're being monitored, that will immediately break their trust, because they think you as a parent don't trust them, which, if you didn't tell them you're monitoring them, you don't trust them. And I understand that you shouldn't trust a child on a device completely independently until their brain is developed enough to have some amount of responsibility with that tech. But one of the things in particular for me is the phones that analyze messages, particularly like private messages between your kid has this phone, they're talking to their friend. If that device is monitoring those messages for cyberbullying, for potentially harmful conversations, whether that's things like going down routes of drug use or suicide, things like that, they're then going to ping that to the parent and say, we found this piece of information that you may want to know about. And one of the companies that I mentioned, they do that, where they analyze that kind of data with their own AI. And within their FAQs, they mention about privacy for children, but they're a third party analyzing all of that information from your child's phone. They have access to that information, and you don't know who they are. You don't know who works for them. And even if the creator, the founder, and the C staff or whatever, C-level staff of that company are all 100% behind keeping kids safe, you don't know the other 50 to 100 people that work for that company. They're obviously, you would like to think they're being validated in some way, and you'd like to hope that they all have good intentions. But we know that's not always going to be the case. And the privacy for that child has been put in the hands of someone that you don't know anything about, all of those people who work there, and you don't know what they're doing with your child's data. So even though they say they care for the privacy of the child from the point of view of the parent, so you as a parent can't see every single message that your child sends, you can't see everything that they are monitoring, only when it comes up with something potentially dangerous, worrying that you need to know about, they send you a little screenshot of what that is. They name that in the sense of privacy for the child, but that's privacy from the parent, not privacy from their company who is monitoring all of the things that your child is doing on their device. And you don't know how they store that. You don't know who has access to that, but yet they're not allowing you access as the parent. So that's one sort of really important thing to me, is that they're naming the privacy of the child, but not from themselves. Um, but also those those sorts of devices, it's really, it has another moral implication in that your child is going to be using certain apps. Like, for example, if it allows you to use WhatsApp, you have agreed to the terms and conditions of that device monitoring that account, but anybody who that child talks to is now also being monitored, and they didn't agree to that terms and conditions. They agreed to WhatsApp's terms and conditions, but not that phone's terms and conditions. So as much as you're trying to protect your child, and obviously if they were talking to someone who was a predator or they were in a dangerous situation, you'd want to know that. But what about the aunts and uncles who are also talking to that child? Their privacy is being invaded by that company as well, because they didn't agree to be monitored that way. And so you're going down a slippery slope of, you're trying to keep your child as safe as possible, but unless you're having those conversations with your child as often as you can about how to use tech as safely as possible, what they are at risk of when they're on tech, and if you even know all of those things, then you're cleaning up after the fact. You're not stopping them from getting into those situations. You're knowing about it afterwards and having to then go and tell your child, "Oh, we've seen that you've been talking about this." How, as much as I think that there are some kids who'll be receptive of that, of, "Okay, yeah, my parent wants to help me," I really would love to know how many times that's actually made things worse for that child rather than actually help them, because knowing information that they didn't realize their parent would know is something that could be really devastating to the child, especially if it's maybe their friend who's been talking about something and maybe their friend's been really depressed and they're feeling very vulnerable, and then your parent knows that that's happening. That sets a really bad standard for your own child's privacy, for them in their relationships.
It can also be misconstrued by the parent. Somebody
Mhm,
says something in passing, I'm so depressed, or, and
mhm,
all of a sudden it's something it never meant to be because of this oversight piece. But you've touched on layers of abstraction there that are extremely complex in terms of consent
mhm,
for children who have not yet formed the proper cognitive ability to make certain decisions for themselves, yet all of their data and decision points are now being extrapolated out to, I assume, some third party cloud environment that's a little
yep,
bit ambiguous in terms of who can access it, what they can do, etc. And if I was to look at this from a threat map perspective, I now have a cohort that I know are within a certain age group that I can target if I get access to these
mhm,
devices. So if I had sinister intentions, I may use that as an avenue. So in some ways, and I have a problem with anything that's internet connected because you just cannot
mhm,
trust it. A vulnerability, a credential leak. You've probably used the same credentials to set up the kids app as you used on 20 other
yep,
accounts. Log on to
yep,
Have I Been Pawned, stick in that email address and see if
mhm,
it's already been compromised. Is that password out there? So you're potentially creating another attack path to your children, which is a frightening prospect if it all goes wrong. I'm very conscious though that parents may feel overwhelmed, and
mhm,
when we have these blunt conversations, it may, to an extent, instill fear or panic.
mhm,
But we live in a world where digital is reality and everyone is connected to an extent that that's not going to revert anytime soon. So, from a parent and a cybersecurity professional to people feeling overwhelmed in
mhm,
how do I deal with this? My friend's kid has a phone, he's got a tablet or whatever. They want to play this game online,
mhm,
but I'm not letting them. And those pressures on the
yeah,
parent to not make their child unhappy, to please the child when maybe that's not the best thing to do. What advice would you give, Katie, to a parent that's just struggling to get a handle on how do I set some boundaries here?
Yeah, so I think it's a hard one in terms of within your own family, not all things work the same for every family. So one family's decisions to let their child use certain technology, certain apps, that's within that that is something that obviously does happen. It happens with tech, it happens with clothes, it happens with board games, it happens with sports that kids play. I am going to sound probably really horrible right now, but we are not there to please our children. We are there to help them become functional adults and make sure that they are equipped to deal with the things that come up. And that you've made a very valid point. Even if you were to completely keep your child away from technology, the friend down the street has it. They might not tell you that they're on their friend's phone. They might not tell you that they're seeing things at a friend's house. We can't hide from the problems of that tech brings. Tech is wonderful for certain things. Like we have obviously all decided tech is the way forward because it's so handy. We can have conversations like this from miles apart. We can talk to family members, we can share videos, we can play games with each other. But it is a really hard thing to do, to set those boundaries and say, here are my reasons for why I don't think this is a good idea. Having that as a discussion with your child as what is it you actually want to do? Is it the game or is it the friend? Because we can set up a play date so that you can go and play. Obviously, depending on the age of the child, play date may not sound quite right, but we can make sure you're able to see that person as often as we can. Or is it the game? What is it about the game? Bring your kid into the conversation, because it's not just about you, but you are the one that is there to protect them from things that they are not yet capable of understanding. And so it's very much a conversation. It's here's my boundaries, come up with some arrangement for, okay, this is an app that you want to play with your friends. You can play it with loudspeaker on in the living room while we're all present. That would be a way of finding a middle ground to be able to allow them to have that access without allowing them free reign, because kids need boundaries, and more so than anything on a piece of tech that's not just giving your child access to the world, it's giving the world access to your child. And people don't think about it that way.
And that is stark, when you say it like that. I also find, Katie, and I've got two kids. One can't walk or talk yet. He's only 11, but one is big and bold. He's heading for the famous five. And I find on wet days, when the board games run out and you let him watch a little bit more telly than he should, etc., the mood is always far worse.
Mm-hmm.
Easier to run straight to an argument, more cantankerous, contrary,
Mm-hmm.
overstimulated or understimulated. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure which one it is, but there's definitely a change in behavior. So I'd hate to think what it'd be like if I sat him with a tablet all day and just let him
Mm-hmm.
play at it and see what his mood is like. I'm fortunate enough I live in the countryside, so I can kick him out the door and get him to run around the field or something.
Yep.
But I can understand if you're you know in a situation where parents are working or there's people
Mm-hmm.
calling over and you just need to keep the kids quiet for a while to have a grown up
Yep.
conversation or whatever.
Yep.
It's very easy to fall into that trap of
Oh,
the
100%. Yeah.
iPad or tablet or whatever. Um, which brings me to my, well, I won't say final question, but one of my last questions. You made a very brave decision to stop working in a field that is very lucrative at the moment to go mind your family. What was the driver there? And it's admirable. I've, as I said, I've 11-week old at the moment, so I can fully appreciate the pressures that being a parent brings, and it's not all rosy. It's very stressful, and there is definitely an intense workload that you need to figure out, especially when it goes from 1 to 2. And I'm sure it
Hmm.
gets worse when you go 2 to 3 or 3 to 4. I hate to think what it looks like if you go to 5, but
Yep.
it's a really admirable decision to step out of a field that has high demand at the moment, such as cybersecurity, to go parent. Was there any particular driver there, or did you just need to take some time to look after you and to help, you know, bring your family up in the way you want, rather than being stuck in the rat race?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I fell into cybersecurity. It wasn't my I want to go and do cybersecurity when I got the job in cybersecurity those many years ago. It was a big accident, really. So it wasn't originally a career of I want to do this and I want to get to this point and I want to do all of that. I've never been a career driven type of person. So kids was always my goal. And whenever it came round to talking about going back to work, I just didn't want to be splitting my time with my then not even 1 year old son with work. And I knew that from my own personality, I find it very difficult to balance that kind of thing. So when I was working, I would get into the office as early as possible so that I missed like the intense like traffic or the intense train journeys, and then would come home as in as little of the like chaos side of travel, and that's not possible when you have a child. Even with working remotely, I did a job for a while where I was completely remotely, and my mental health took a tank because I wasn't seeing people, and I could only imagine trying to do that while also having to look after a child in and around that. So I was very lucky that my partner has a good enough job that he could manage to bring us in an income, and I could step back and stay at home with my kids. I now have two kids. Um, they're both preschool age, so like not school yet, but we have also in that time from me leaving work decided to home educate. And so we also have that side of things where that's particularly difficult to do if you're also working a 9 to 5. Um, but I don't feel like I have I like that I have that choice. Not many people have the choice to be able to completely step back. Like looking at how much it was going to cost for nursery for one child was astronomical, and I couldn't imagine going back to work to pay someone else to look after my child, to not have very much extra and have not seen my child. So for the fact that people do feel they have to do that because they just need to be able to live, it's really hard to not have that as a decision. So I'm very lucky, and I know I'm very privileged to be able to make that choice in the first place. But I still feel like I'm able to keep within the industry at least a little bit, because I do have a desire to make sure that my kids are as safe as they can be when it comes to tech. My husband works in cybersecurity as well, so I still hear a lot of the, oh, did you hear this happened? And, all of the crazy stories from the what cyber attacks happened recently, that kind of thing. And I'm also part of the B-Sides Belfast organising committee, so I get to see a lot of the stuff from that point of view of just being in the industry. So I still like it. I still like learning about it. I still want to know what's happening. But at the minute, my focus is more on the how to protect the next generation and how to give them the tools to protect themselves. And a big part of that for me now being in the home education community is that a lot of those parents want me to help their kids understand how tech affects their lives and what like sharing pictures with their friends could end up as, without being what I always feel like a party pooper kind of thing when I say be very careful about who takes your picture. Be very careful about asking for permission before you take someone's picture. Like with my kids, as often as I can, I ask them, is it okay for me to take your picture? Because I want them to grow up knowing they have a right to say no, and that their image is theirs, and it's not something that someone should be able to just take and use what they will. So yeah, it's been interesting making that decision.
Well, look, Katie, I think it's very admirable, and you're forging your own path, and you're really are contributing back to the industry, even if you don't think you are. So I think you need to give a shout out to how can people find you online if they want to keep up to date with your advice, and where can we find you?
Yeah, I am on social media as cybersec mama on Instagram and Twitter and Blue Sky. And also TikTok, but I don't post that often, but I'm hoping to try and get more out there, and LinkedIn as Katie Colgan. Um, but just as and when I can, I try and put something out when I've got time around the kids.
Look, Katie, that's perfect. We'll send people over to CyberSec Mama to look you up, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of valuable insights coming out of you. I can tell already you're not going to lay idle. You have a lot more to give back to the industry, and I
Oh,
really
definitely.
appreciate you coming on to the Entropy podcast to talk to me. I think it's been a really valuable and insightful episode for people, especially parents, to listen to, and I really do appreciate taking time out of your busy day.
Yeah. Thanks very much for having me, and hopefully it wasn't all doom and gloom.
I don't think so. Well, if people are depressed, you can leave a comment below the below the episode. Thanks a million, Katie.
Thank you.